imagining that many of you will be familiar with this Oscar-winning film and the stellar performance of Nigel Hawthorne as King George III. It was originally a play written by Alan Bennett and then adapted into film, and it has shaped many people's perceptions of the madness of King George from the turn from the cruel treatment of Bedlam to the more enlightened treatment of moral therapy. Let's start with the history and his initial outbreak of madness in 1788-89. He may have had an earlier bout in 1765, but the recovery was quite rapid. He was going to go on and have further bouts in 1801 and 1804, and then 1810 until the end of his life in 1820. But it is this bout of madness that has focused the attention of both historians and playwrights. It probably commenced in the summer of 1788, where George had visited the fashionable watering place of Cheltenham. And after this, the progress of the disease, its cure, and the political warring sum up many of the aspects of this subject. So to the outbreak. He falls sick at Cheltenham with a bilious fever. He's treated by his chief physician, who purges him. By mid-October, he's getting stomach pains, cramps, spasms, swollen feet. The initial diagnosis is rheumatism. And then he deteriorates. He becomes loud, unpredictable, agitated, restless. He's having distorted hearing and visions. He is uncontrollable. The king is off his head. And his physicians, Sir George Baker, Sir Lucas Pepys, and Richard Warren, cup, purge, and counter-irritate, using those methods that I've described already. News of his condition spreads from Windsor to the wider world. This is a very serious constitutional situation. When the head of state is mad, there is a real problem. Now, notionally, George was the head of a constitutional monarchy. It had been this way since 1688. The power of the monarch was curtailed to some degree by Parliament. At the same time, he still chooses the Prime Minister, he sets the political agenda, but he's dependent upon Parliament for financial support and taxation. But he's far more powerful than the monarch is today. Parliament can be called or prorogued, that's dismissed, by the king. He can choose to dismiss the government, and it can't be opened without him agreeing to make a speech. It is a role that in George's time was still cloaked in majesty. He's the head of the Church of England, and he has a semi-divine aura. The House of Hanover had not purged itself of the sense of the divine right of kings that had served the Stuarts so badly. His madness, then, creates the potential for a serious political crisis and the possibility of anarchy. Warring factions are not going to be able to be controlled by the king because the king is off his head. The chaos is unleashed. His situation deteriorates through autumn. His physicians are paralysed. What do you do with him? A king whose body is divine, whose touch can still cure scrofula, allegedly. He can't be treated as an ordinary lunatic. And anyway, he's the one with the authority. What are we physicians to do? Now, to understand the potential for divisiveness and political instability, we have to understand something about the political system at this time. The Tories were in power under the Prime Minister Pitt, also known as William Pitt the Younger, the youngest ever Prime Minister, aged 24 when he came to power in 1783. Traditionally, the Tories had been conservative, supporters of the gentry and the countryside, supporters of the status quo, the monarchy as it stood. They're not looking for radical agendas of reform. They're looking to keep things as it is and maintaining the social order. The Whigs, on the other hand, tend to be more radical. Some of them are even beginning to argue for universal manhood suffrage. Others have backed the American colonies in their revolution against the British colonial power. They want to see change. They want to see a dilution of the power of the monarch. They are able to enlist the support of King George's eldest son, the Prince of Wales. And what they do is they campaign for a regency where he will, in effect, take over the crown from George. This is the Prince Regent voluptuary under the horrors of indigestion, a satirisation of Prinny, the Prince of Wales, who would later become George IV, but he was very well connected with the Whigs. George's madness becomes the centre of a political power struggle. As the King's equerry Greville said, the physicians appear to shrink from responsibility, and to this time they have not established their authority, though pressed by every attendant. There was only one thing to do, and that was to call an outsider who was not going to be cowed by the possibility of treating the divine monarch. And so the Reverend Dr. Francis Willis was summoned to court from his private madhouse at Grateford, Lincolnshire. He is an outsider. He is not even a fellow at the Royal College of Physicians, London, which is the usual thing that an attendant to the king has to be. So the outsider, well, he's an outsider to court, he's an outsider to London, but he comes from a pretty good background. His father was a vicar at Lincoln Cathedral. He's gone to Oxford where he gets a BA and then an MA. He's interested in medicine, studies a bit, but his father wants him to take holy orders in the Church of England, and he does so. However, he practices medicine without a licence. There's not so much of a problem doing that at this period, and studies his medical courses at Oxford and gets a Bachelor of Medicine and a Doctor of Medicine in 1759. And he's one of the individuals that founds the Lincoln General Hospital, and he's a physician there between 1769, and he successfully treats patients with mental disorders both there and in his private asylum. So eventually he arrives at court on the 5th of December. The king's physicians won't speak to him. He brings with him his servants and his son, and they take total control over the king, exercising absolute authority over his body. Everyone else is excluded from his treatment. He prevents the further prescription of cupping, counter-irritation and purging, and then mixes coercion with persuasion, physical authority with gentle reasoning. Gradually, he places the king under his authority. And again, here is Greville speaking about Willis. Willis remained firm and reproved him in determined language, telling him he must control himself or otherwise he would put him in a strait waistcoat. That's kind of like a straitjacket. On this hint, Dr. Willis went out and returned with one in his hand. The king eyed it attentively, and alarmed at the doctor's firmness, began to submit. On Dr. Willis wishing him good night and recommending composure and moderation, he retired. So there we see two things mixed. One is targeting reason, targeting the mind. The other is still retaining the threat of restraint, which is a thing that is going to go with moral therapy. By early 1789, George was on the road to recovery. The Whigs had been forestalled in their attempts to pass the Regency Bill. The Prince of Wales put in George's place, and Willis was sent away from court and rewarded with a pension of £1,000 per annum. I can't even begin to tell you how much money that is. That's bigger than a lotto win. And the political crisis was averted. So what was his methods? He was called before a House of Commons committee to answer for his treatment of the king. The Whig, Edmund Burke, confronted him. Why did he, a lowly commoner, not even a member of the gentry, think that he could presume to control the king? Now, Burke himself had had a history of mental instability, and maybe Willis knew that as he performed this trick. Place the candles between us, Mr. Burke, and I'll give you an answer. This so Burke can see Willis's face. So the candles are placed in such a way that Willis can be seen. And he stares at Burke, and he captures him. There, sir, by the eye! I should have looked at him thus, sir, thus. In other words, he is using his eyes as a method of coercion, as a way of capturing the mind of the person that he's treating and establishing control and authority over him. Now, there have been many retrospective diagnoses of George's condition. Before the 1970s, it was a combination of psychosocial things, For example, the strain of losing the American colony. There were his nitpicking attention to detail. He couldn't let anything off his desk without dealing with it in detail. Everything had to pass before him. And then there might have been sexual frustration. Who knows? But in 1973, McAlmine and Hunter settled upon porphyria, which is a genetic metabolic condition triggering the overproduction of porphyrins in the liver and creating a condition that mimics, or at least creates the symptoms of, serious psychotic mental illness. In 2005, more retrospective diagnosis going on. People like a bit of arsenic poisoning. There were suggestions that George might have been poisoned by arsenic. A few months later, further analysis seemed to indicate that poor diet had triggered porphyria. So Willis embodies the figure of the mad doctor during this period and the transitions that are occurring in the late 18th and early 19th century in the overall market for madness. We can see here the tensions between the physicians who want to treat the body and the mad doctors who, after Locke and Molyneux and Voltaire, are starting to target reason, the mind. And as we will see, within the historiography itself, the interpretations of what it was that caused the king's madness swing between body and mind and back again. Bodily causes, somatic causes to psychosocial causes.